Back in 2019, João Félix was the most wanted youngster in the world. When he moved to Atletico, the Portuguese became the third most expensive player of all time and his popularity rose to an all-time high. But nowadays, his stock has dropped massively and no elite European team wants to have the once promising youngster in their squad. It's a puzzling situation that extends far beyond the football pitch, and since I'm one of the few Portuguese football YouTubers who witnessed his incredible rise up close, I figured I could share the real reasons behind his massive failure that are not as well known by people outside of Portugal. But first, let me give you some context. Despite what most people think, João Félix didn't spend the majority of his youth days with Benfica. Instead, he spent 6 years with their biggest rivals FC Porto, but due to his size, he was played less often than his teammates, which led to his exit to Benfica. 4 years later, he became the star player in a dominating Benfica squad that recovered a 7-point disadvantage to Porto to win the Portuguese league. As you can probably imagine, he became a polarizing figure in Portugal. You either loved the guy or completely despised him, but there was one thing that all Portuguese fans agreed upon. His move to Atletico was nonsensical. We saw him play on a weekly basis. He linked up the midfield with the attack like no other at his age, and he scored a lot of goals as he showed confidence to make runs and take chances at goal despite never playing as a main striker. Which leads me to the first thing that went wrong, the differences in playing styles. In Atletico, he was expected to constantly press the defenders, which drained them and made them less prone to making those runs into the area that made them famous. Instead, Simeone opted to test him in different roles, either as a winger, striker or second striker, but never took advantage of his own unique traits from a tactical sense. Besides, that playing style also took a toll on him, causing him several injuries that made his adaptation even harder. And since Simeone was already a reputable coach who turned Atletico into the third best team in Spain, the media and fans would always take the coach's side. As you can imagine, being criticized on a daily basis by the Spanish media destroys almost every player's mental health and confidence. But while everyone was busy calling him a flop in Spain, in his own country the media were more fixated on his relationship with Magui Cruzeiro. Which leads me to the second thing that went wrong, his controversial relationship. Being the polarizing figure that he is, it's normal that many people will try to throw dirt at Felix's name. Still, Magui Cruzeiro did nothing to make things easier for her boyfriend, as she was regularly seen dancing inside several Lisbon nightclubs with other men. In one instance, she even asked for Pedro Porro's shirt and would later be seen in a nightclub in a very intimate moment with a then Sporting player. There was also another episode where she allegedly leaked a photo of Felix's private parts. And I'm not even gonna go on detail on the various times people have alleged that his relationship with her was just a cover-up for his own homosexuality. If you've been in serious relationships, you know that when things start to go wrong, most areas of your life start to be affected by the drama. Imagine if you had no privacy and everyone knew the problems that you had with your partner. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that João Félix only has himself to blame, his massive ego. Although it was his confidence and willingness to take chances on himself that made the entire football world stop to take a look at him, it was also that ego that set him up for failure. João Félix always saw himself as a star. These are not my words. He has said multiple times he doesn't feel the need to pass to Cristiano in the national team, and even left off a transfer to Champions League contestants Newcastle United. Felix wants to be among the elite, and his unwillingness to take a step back or to adapt to something that might not seem ideal at first sight is what ultimately keeps him in the same place. Just look at his current situation. He could move to a mid-table Premier League team like Aston Villa, or even go back to Benfica with a reduced salary, but he doesn't want to take that step back. Instead, he prefers to move to Saudi Arabia, have the freedom to play the way he wants, and continue to receive a massive contract in a way to prove that he's still a top-tier player. But in a way, I'm actually wrong. Having an inflated ego isn't entirely João's fault, and arguably what caused that are the two biggest reasons behind his so far failed career. And the first is his agent, Jorge Mendes. The Portuguese agent is perhaps one of the most detrimental figures to world football, as he usually puts his own financial interests above the players' careers and teams. He is a man that is moved solely by money, and in case you didn't know, he practically controls a Portuguese national team. There are several players who deserve opportunities and don't receive them because they're simply not under Jorge Mendes' agency. He sees the Portuguese national team not as a squad that must play at the highest level, but instead as a show window of his players to the world. And despite all his controversial takes, I actually believe Felix when he stated that Barcelona was always his preferred destination. But that's the thing, it doesn't matter where you fit in the best, when you're under Jorge Mendes, you go to whoever pays the most. If you don't believe me, just look at what's happening with Gonçalo Ramos. one of the most promising strikers in world football, was transferred just a few days before the season starts to PSG, a club in disarray, playing in a league that isn't ideal to a player's development. If Jorge really had Felix's best interest in mind, he wouldn't sign him to a team where he would never be able to shine, at least not without completely changing the way he plays. The other reason though, unless you're Portuguese, you'll be completely unaware of. This phenomenon has ultimately destroyed not only João Félix, but also several Benfica youngsters. And that is the enormous amount of hype by two newspapers on Benfica players. When it comes to Portuguese football, there are three big publishers: O Jogo, A Bola, and Record. While O Jogo tends to favor FC Porto, they don't hype their players nearly as much as both A Bola and Record do to Benfica youngsters. But I'm not gonna go into conspiracy theories that Benfica bought Lisbon Sport Media to sell their players at a higher price. Instead, I believe the newspapers do that because the vast majority of football fans are Benfica supporters. Therefore, they like knowing that they have the most skilled prospects in the world in their squad. But in reality, the value of those youngsters is vastly overrated, and as they face tougher opposition in other leagues, they failed to live up to the expectations created in Portugal. There are some cases where the players succeeded, such as Ruben Dias, Oblak, or Ederson. However, the best former Benfica players are the ones who were the least hyped. Bernardo Silva and João Cancelo left when they were still reserves, and Di Maria was never seen as the best player in the squad. Then you look at the number of overhyped Benfica players, and you start to see a pattern. Lindelof was hyped as one of the best centre-backs in the world, bench player at United. Jetson, one of the brightest centre midfielders, currently at Besiktas. Nelson Oliveira, future star of the national team, currently without a club after leaving PAOK in Greece. I could name at least 10 other players on the top of my head, but I don't want to bore you when you already get the picture. To conclude, this precarious position that João Félix is in isn't because of Chelsea or Atletico. It stemmed from the pressure and overconfidence that was instilled upon him by the various media outlets, but it would be sticking with the wrong people and making decisions based on his own ego and not with a rational mind that ultimately backed Félix into a corner. Now the question stands, will he ever bounce back? Will he ever become a world-class player? Leave your opinion in the comments and let's have a discussion. Don't forget to subscribe to Throne FC so you never miss the most interesting football discussions, stories and news. Like the video if you want to see more controversial debates, and as always, thank you for watching until the end, I appreciate you, and I will see you soon.